In those days the crest was in service to the shade, protectors of Heartvale. For the rich and powerful of any city, mercenaries are a dirty necessity. We are convenient and deniable, a force to be reckoned with, while also being easily forgotten. No one understands more than our captain that we are being used in a game of politics. The Shade are just that, a political force, controlled by a powerful member of Heartvale's Council of 12. Hiring us provides them with a measure of deniability in the chaos that is to come. Of course, we thrive on chaos. Baccio deFara is a name on many lips these days. Handsome, rich, scion of a powerful house, his influence is sought by many. His uncle, Cavo de Soto, sits on the Council of 12, and it is said in many circles that his own son Inan is not favored to succeed him. Those same circles name Baccio deFara as the likely heir. Perhaps the controlling hand behind the Shade does not care for Lord de Soto, or perhaps their concerns truly are for the city's well-being. Regardless, their gold spends well, and soon Baccio deFara will lose his newest distraction. Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures. As always, I'm your game master and solo player, Steve Morrison. On this week's episode, Benn tries to facilitate a way into the deFara estate. Find out what happens on episode 14, Sour Ale. Benn and Erdira leave the scriptorium behind and make their way back towards the Howl, where they left Arid keeping an eye on the deFara estate. As they are walking, I think they are debating what the best way in is going to be. And I think Benn strikes upon the idea of getting in with one of the merchants that is making deliveries and basically posing as someone who is making a delivery. So Benn is thinking about this, thinking about being a laborer who is delivering something for the party. And I think he has the idea, and he says, I'm going to stop by Merrick's brewery on my way. I want to see if Merrick has been hired to bring beer to this party. If so, that would be very convenient. It would be a good way in for us. Erdira says, are you sure you want to involve your friend? These things have a way of getting dangerous, and I know you know that, but I would hate for you to involve your friend and put him into unnecessary danger. Politics can be a bloody game. I know how bloody it can be, and believe me, so does Merrick. I will tell him as much as I need to, and he will make his own decisions. All right, very well. Erdira kind of raises her hands in defeat, and they are going to swing by the brewery. Now, I'm going to ask the fate chart if Merrick has been hired to provide beer for this party. Now, we've already established that he is one of the premier brewers in the city, that people are very interested in his beer. And so I think that means that it is likely that he has been hired to provide beer. So because I haven't set a new scene yet, which maybe I should have, but I feel like this can fall within the same scene of them going to talk to Godwin as they're making their way back. And so the chaos factor is at 4 at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and roll on the fate chart. We're going to find out if Merrick is already hired to provide beer to this party. So this is likely. Chaos rank of 4. Let's find out. 57. No, he has not been hired to provide beer to the party. So I think he arrives at the brewery and walks in the door. Merrick looks over from a vat that he is in the middle of stirring as grain is pouring in through a chute above him, and this like steam is coming out of the vat. And Merrick says, Ben, my friend, it's good to see you. What are you doing over here? Come on in. And he's churning this great mass of grain in this mash as he is turning it and churning it. Ben approaches and says, Merrick, my good friend, I'm wondering if you know about this party that Lord Bacchio deFara is hosting at his estate, and whether or not you have been hired to deliver the beer. And I think that Merrick hunches his shoulders a little bit and says, I'm aware of the party. Yes, of course. I did offer my services, but unfortunately, they decided to go with a different brewery. Ben looks up at him and can see the disappointment on his face, and he says, I'm very sorry, Merrick. Do you know what other brewery was hired to do this work? And I think it's a near sure thing that he knows what this other brewery is. 12. Yes. In fact, that's an exceptional yes. He most certainly knows who this other brewery is. And I think because it's an exceptional yes, it has to be some sort of rival to him. So let's go ahead and roll a name up for this rival brewer. And once again, I'm going to use the Maze Rats character names. I'm going to roll a d6 and 1 to 3. I'll roll on the female names chart. 4 to 6, I'll roll on the male names chart. It's a 5, which is the male names chart. So I'm going to roll this. And I've got a 5 and a 2. Percival. Perfect. So Percival the brewer. Merrick says, oh, yes, I know exactly who they hired. They hired Percival of Percival's Ales. He's a fine brewer, I suppose, though I think he's a little stuck up in his demeanor. Ben takes this in and says, I see. Merrick, I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't want you to ask me any questions back. All right. If you were hired to deliver beer to this party, would you allow me to accompany you as a laborer? I would be happy to help you deliver the beer. Merrick looks at him with his shrewd eyes and says, well, of course I would be happy to have the help from an old friend, but I have not been hired to do the beer. In fact, Percival, I believe, has been bragging about the contract that he signed. It's all set in stone now. Ben nods very solemnly and says, it was a thought, after all. I see you're busy, Merrick. I don't want to trouble you any further. I thank you so much for your assistance, and I'll come by later and maybe we can talk some more. Of course. And he's still like stirring the mash around. And Benn and Erdira leave. As soon as they're back out on the streets, Erdira looks at him and says, "You've got a plan, don't you?" And Benn smiles and says, "I think it's time that we go visit Percival's ales." And that is how we're going to set the next scene. So I'm going to actually raise the chaos factor back up to 5, because even though the situation was under relative control when they were talking to Godwin, the fact that Arid's magical senses were noticed by some sort of presence in the estate, I think is going to raise the chaos factor up. So our next scene is going to be visiting Percival's ales. Benn certainly has it in his mind that he's going to make something happen. So we are going to roll our d10, and we are going to compare it against our chaos rank. I got an 8, which is above our chaos factor of 5. So we are going to play out this scene as expected. I think the brewery, Percival's Ales, is also in the scales, just like Merrick's brewery is. And so it's only a few streets over as they make their way through the crowded market streets over to Percival's Ales. And Percival's Ales is, I think, this 2-story building that has the mash tun symbol on the front. And there are a number of folks crowded around. And I think something that I'm envisioning here is that these breweries are mostly for production, for producing beer for the taverns and other places here in the city. But I think each of them does have a small tap room where some people can come in. And I think as they are approaching this, they see that it is very, very crowded. And Benn thinks back to seeing Merrick's brewery, which was busy. There were people sitting in the tap house, but it wasn't crowded in this same way. And so I think they're going to watch for a little while. Do they see Percival inside the brewery? I think it is basically has to be. So this is a pretty low chance of it being a no, but we'll find out. 90, which is still a yes, because it was a pretty much a sure thing. So they are watching through the windows, waiting. I think that takes a while. They're able to get in and find a spot at the bar, and they get a couple tankards of ale, and they're keeping an eye, and they can see that this area has a very open space into the brewery, and they can see Percival, who is, I think, this big man with a great big red beard and very sort of rotund, and is kind of moving around through the various vessels back there, checking on things and moving stuff around. As Benn and Erdira are sitting there watching, Erdira says, "What are you planning?" Benn, sipping on the beer, which is actually quite good, says, "I'm not sure yet, but I think I will have a talk with this Percival and see if we can't come to an understanding." She says, "There are a lot of witnesses around here," looking around the room. Benn smiles at her a little bit and says, "Erdira, are you suggesting that I might try to kill this man?" Erdira shrugs a little bit and says, "Look, I don't really know you all that well, so who am I to judge what you may or may not do?" Benn takes another sip of the beer and then nods and smiles a little bit, and then calls the bartender over and is going to pull out a couple of gold coins, which he places on the bar and pushes them forward. The bartender looks at them and then looks at Benn, and Benn says, I am interested in speaking with the brewer. I have a business proposition for him. And what's the likelihood that this is going to work? Because I feel like Percival probably has a lot on his plate preparing for this event. So I'm going to say it's actually going to be, I think, likely that he's going to get a little bit of FaceTime, but it's definitely going to be a very quick thing. So let's see. Our chaos rank of 5, and we're rolling likely on the fate chart. We rolled a 13, which is an exceptional yes. So, in fact, this does work. The bartender scoops the coins off the bar and looks back in the brewery and then looks back to Benn and says, I'll let you know when a good time is. Benn nods and says, thank you, and goes back to drinking his beer. Maybe 20 minutes later, the bartender pops back into the brewery, speaks with Percival for a brief moment. Percival nods, and then the bartender returns to the front and says, he'll see you now. Benn stands and gives Erdira a half smile and then slips back into the brewery where Percival is standing. Now, Percival is kind of got his arms folded. He is looking at an open vat that is bubbling away. And as Benn enters the brewery, he looks over and says, what can I do for ya? Benn approaches him and says, Master Brewer, I am interested in hiring your services. The brewer says, well, what do you have in mind? Are you looking to get some of my beer for, and he kind of gives Benn an appraising look and then says, your crew? Benn smiles at him and says, yes, I am here representing the Drift. Our steward captain, Auxilia, is interested in throwing an event. And he kind of points back towards Erdira and says, my friend is a representative of the Vixilia War College as well. You see, they are in the midst of planning a sort of war game, and the crews are going to need a fair amount of beer to sustain them through the next few weeks of challenging endeavors. I've heard that your brewery is the best in town, and I would love to buy all of your beer. Percival looks at him and says, and when is this war game going to be? I have a rather large contract that I'm fulfilling in a couple of days. All the beer I have right now is destined for that. But I could certainly get something brewing for you, and in a couple of weeks have it ready. I'm afraid that's not going to work with my timeline. The war game is set to start in 5 days, and I need the beer by then in order to have our opening ceremonies, as well as keep the crews of both the drift ships and the Heartvale Navy docile at night. Percival looks at him and says, well, I don't know that there's anything I can do. Have you tried asking one of the other breweries? Merrick's, just a couple streets over, is a phenomenal brewery. He's a fine man, and I'm sure would be happy to help you out. And Benn says, oh, I'm afraid it has to be your beer. Admiral Welfren of the Vixilia War College has insisted if this cooperation between the Drift and the Navy is to work, it's going to require the best beer in Heartvale. Tell me, is there no way you could get out of your current contract? We are very interested in getting your beer and would be happy to pay not only your fee, but also a little extra as an apology for having to break your current contract. And I think Benn is going to attempt to persuade with leverage here. So when you try to convince someone to do or say something for you by using something you have against them or offering to give them what they want, roll plus Wily. For NPC targets on a 10+, they will accept your offer and do say what you want. On a 7 to 9, the MC picks one. So I've got 2d6 plus 1 for my Wily on this roll. Here we go. 3 plus 1 is a 4, which is a failure. And what I think that means in this case is that Percival says, I'm very sorry, and I really wish I could help you, but you see, I have signed a contract, and my word is good on that. I appreciate your interest, and I do hope that in the future I might be able to provide some beer to the Drift and also to the War College, but my contract has been signed, and I must follow through with that. Surely someone like you understands that your Drift is built on agreements between parties being honored. Benn nods and says, well, I must admit I'm disappointed, but I cannot blame you. I do understand the need to keep your word. Oh well, I suppose another time then. And he is going to turn around and return back to the bar, pay their tab, and they're going to head out. As they exit the tap room, Erdira looks at Benn and says, didn't go well, did it? Benn shakes his head and says, no, I'm afraid he did not accept my lie. I suppose we're going to have to do things a little differently. And they are going to make their way back to meet up with Arid. So when they make it back to Arid, he had sensed this presence, but has anything changed since then? We ended the last episode with the presence sort of noticing him, and he had this sense that these eyes that were perhaps unnatural were turning towards him. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's an immediate consequence, more that there's something that is aware of his presence, but not necessarily that is actively working against him at this moment. So, has anything changed when Benn and Erdira meet back up with him? I'm going to say it's very unlikely that anything has changed. Chaos rank of 5. 24, which is a yes. Yes, it has changed. Okay. What has changed? Let's roll on action and subject. So we've got 32 delay and 93 delay weather. Well, that's interesting. A delay of weather. Okay, so I think what that means is when they get back, the weather has changed. And now there is a light rain that is starting to develop and is getting more and more intense as they approach. And I think what that means is the gate is closed up and these deliveries have stopped as Benn and Erdira pull their cloaks up over their heads. They come and they find Arid, and he is huddled against this stonework, getting absolutely soaked while he's standing out there. And as they approach, I think Benn says, Arid, there you are. And the mage looks at him and says, good, I think we should get out of here. Is there a problem? Arid eyes the walls of the hedges and says, I do not know yet, but there is a presence inside that detected me. I would have left sooner, but I did not want you to miss me when you came back. So they are going to head back to the crow's nest to talk over everything that they learned. Once they're back in the crow's nest and they're sitting around a table drying out, Arid says, there is something about this presence that concerns me, my friend. Benn says, what kind of presence did you sense? It felt like it was with Lord deFara, but not him. Like there was another presence that was mingled with his own. Now, I don't know that Arid would know what this could be. So let's ask the fate chart, because that's the easiest way to find something out. So I think there's no way that Arid knows what this is. And I'm going to roll on our cast rank of 5. There is still a small chance that we'll get a yes off of this. 74. No, he does not know. He says, I do not know what I felt, but there was some presence there that noticed me. I think he is considering this, and I'm also going to ask the question, what is the likelihood that Lephalia is around? Because I think Lephalia would know what this is, or what this could be, I should say. And I think it is 50-50 that she's around. So, cast rank of 5, 50-50 that Lephalia is around and in earshot. 5. So, an exceptional yes. So not only is she within earshot, but she is listening to them. And when she hears him say this, she gets up from where she's sitting at the bar and walks over and looks at Arid, and I think actually like reaches out and grabs his face and turns his head up to her so that she can look into his eyes. And she says, and what did you see exactly? Arid, probably used to this sort of behavior from the chief sorceress of the crest, simply looks up at her and says, I extended my senses and tried to get a feel for the place. And when I did so, I saw this Bacchio deFara, and there was as if another presence was overlaid on him. Like it was around him? Or like it was part of him? Arid says, like it was part of him. Interesting. Very interesting. You've given me much to think about. Do you know what this is? She looks down at him and gives one of her patented wide smiles and says, I think I might, yes. But I must think on this for a time. In the meanwhile, I suggest you be very cautious around there. You see, it is possible that this presence is dormant, but if you wake it, if you provoke it, I promise you, you will not want to be in the vicinity when it decides to act. And then she's going to turn and walk away as Arid is sitting there somewhat confused by her words. Erdira watches her go and says, well, that was a little weird. Benn looks at her and says, you get used to it, really. Or so I'm told. Erid, are you all right? Erid, who is looking contemplative, says, yes, I am all right, my friend. I think I will retire for the evening. I must think as well. Benn says, before you go, I have a request. Do you have anything that I could use to poison some beer, make it go bad? Erid looks from the tankard that's sitting in front of him to Benn and says, why? Don't worry, I'm not going to use it on you or anyone else here. I think the best way to get in is for my friend Merrick to be the brewer extraordinaire who serves the deFara party. But currently, he has a contract with Percival's Ales. If I poison all the beer and make it go bad, then Percival will have no recourse but to tell deFara that he cannot fulfill his contract, and the nobleman will search for another brewer. And I believe, based on what Percival told me directly, it's likely he will recommend Merrick. That will be our way in. Erid looks at him and says, that is very cruel to take a man's livelihood that way. Benn looks back at Erid and shrugs a little bit and says, I'm sure he'll recover. But if we're going to do this, this needs to happen quickly. Does Erid have some sort of potion or the ability to make something, a magical charm or something that Benn could use to cause all of the beer in the brewery to go sour? Let's find out. I think it is 50-50. 75 is a no. So Erid shakes his head and says, I'm sorry, my friend. I do not have anything like that. I must go. I must think on what Lephalia has said. Of course, go rest. I'll take care of it. And Benn is going to spend some time thinking about various herbs and things that he knows about brewing from having been friends with Merrick for a long time and watching him brew back in the day. So, does he know of something that would make the beer go bad? I think because of his experience with Merrick, we're going to call this likely. 88 is a no. So he does not know anything offhand, which means I think he's going to have to go talk to Merrick. He leaves the crow's nest, and I think Erdira asks if he wants her to come with, but he says, no, thank you. I will go speak with Merrick alone. He's going to make his way to Merrick's brewery, and it's later in the evening now, so there are still a few people in the tap house, but Merrick is, at this point, sitting at the bar, drinking and looking around, watching the customers. When Benn walks in, Merrick waves at him, and Benn joins him. Merrick says, Ben, I'm so glad you came back. Look, I'm very sorry about earlier. I wish I had gotten that contract, but well, it's a bit of a sore subject. Percival is a phenomenal brewer, and I wish him well, but I was really hoping to get my beer in the mouths of some of those elites that are going to be at that party. Ben, I think knowing Merrick pretty well, just nods and says, I understand, my friend, I'm sorry. And is going to, over the course of the next few minutes, steer the conversation away from that and towards beer and the sorts of things that would make beer go bad quickly. And I think he is going to do so, and I'm going to roll again on the fate chart. Because I don't think this is a move where he needs to persuade Merrick. Like, Merrick is more than happy to talk to him about any of this stuff. So this question for the fate chart is more of, does Merrick notice, does Merrick put 2 and 2 together that Benn is trying to suss out how to essentially poison a batch of beer? So wily defines how cunning, witty, charming, or seductive you are. Sly determines how clever, learned, wise, and astute you are. So I think in this case, it's going to be based off of wily, and his wily is 1. And so I think if his wily was higher, I might give this a better chance. But I think it's going to be unlikely that Merrick catches on to what's going on. I think if it was based off of Sly, which was higher, or if he had more points in Wily, it would be even less likely that Merrick would catch on. But I think because Benn is a little bit tricky, he's going to get unlikely here. So it's unlikely that Merrick catches on, but there's still a chance to get a yes. 82. So no, Merrick does not catch on to this. And after a couple hours of conversation, Benn comes away with an understanding of how to make beer go bad. Basically, by getting Merrick to talk about all the things he does to try and prevent beer from going bad. So Benn, armed with this knowledge, in the middle of the night is going to make his way to Percival's ales and is going to attempt to poison the beer. And that'll be our next scene setup. I'm going to increase the chaos factor to 6 because even though nothing really bad happened in the previous scene, but because he kept getting stymied, both in the attempts to convince Percival to break his contract and also having to resort to talking to Merrick about this, I think the chaos factor goes up. So this is going to be sneak into Percival's and poison the beer is the next scene setup. So we're going to go ahead and roll our D10 and compare it against our chaos factor of 6 to see how things go. 2, an interrupt scene. Okay, so let's go ahead and roll our event focus to see what the focus of this interrupt is. 50, which is move away from a thread. And we are going to go ahead and roll on action and subject for this. So this is 69, which is ruin. And the subject is 2, dreams. Ruin dreams. So our open threads right now are recover the artifact from the estate of Bacchio deFara, learn more about the lieutenant, learn more about Admiral Welfrin, and find out what happened between the Admiral and Auxilia. So our prompt here is ruin dreams. And with those 4 threads, I'm going to roll a d6, and I'll re-roll 5s and 6s. So this is 3. Learn more about Admiral Welfrin. We see the Tame at night. It's raining, and there are peals of thunder and flashes of lightning illuminating the wet docks. And there is a naval ship in port that looks as though it is ready to set sail. A cloaked figure walks through the rain and approaches the dock and steps aboard. The sailors aboard ignore this hooded figure as they make their way to the cabin. The door opens, and standing in the doorway is Admiral Elizabeth Welfrin. She looks at the hooded figure and then steps aside, gesturing for the figure to enter. The figure enters the small cabin, and the Admiral shuts the door. And the Admiral says, "I did not expect to see you here tonight." The hooded figure turns and says, "You're ready to get underway?" The Admiral nods and says, "I am." The hooded figure says, "Good. And when you have found the Vidala, you know what to do with them." The Admiral nods again. The hooded figure says, "Good. You were part of this mess. You're going to help clean it up." For a third time, the Admiral nods. Benn arrives at Percival's Ales and makes his way to the door. It is locked, of course, but that is not something that bothers a Black Hood. He removes the tools of his trade and is going to pick the lock and make his way inside. I'm going to make a face duress roll for this as he attempts to pick the lock. Not because he is incapable of picking the lock, but because I think Percival, much like Merrick does, lives in a small apartment, either above or beside the brewery. And it is possible that he is either still awake or will hear someone breaking in. So this is going to be face duress. This is plus steady, which is +2. There we go. 5 on the dice plus 2 is a 7. So on a 7 to 9, you have flinched, stalled, or hesitated. The MC will pick one or two of the following and tell you what it looks like if you take it. You can achieve your goal, but it'll come at a price. You can achieve your goal, but only partially. You cannot achieve your goal, but can do something similar instead. So I'm going to take, you can achieve your goal, but it'll come at a price. And I think the price is that once Merrick hears that all of Percival's beer has been poisoned by basically the method that they talked about the previous night, he is going to know that Benn did this. And because of that, there may be fallout in their relationship. But for the meantime, Benn enters the brewery. He makes his way through quietly, cautiously, and he opens up some of the vats, and he looks through some of the shelves that Percival has in here. And he pulls out a variety of ingredients. And then he starts dumping them into the vats. He takes a few moments to make sure that every single vat got a dosage. And then he goes into the cellar and he finds the casks of all the stored beer. And I think he even has a moment where he says, "Gods forgive me for this." And he is going to take a small pick and crack a hole into every single barrel that is in the cellar. And I am going to make another face duress for that, as I think this is the point at which Percival, if he's around, would be able to hear something happening, because there's going to be crunching of metal on wood in this cellar. So phased arrest +2. 7 + 2 is 9. So once again, you can achieve your goal, but it'll come at a price. You can achieve your goal, but only partially. You cannot achieve your goal, but can do something similar instead. So I think he is going to achieve his goal, but it comes at a price. What is that price? We already know what the price is for the first one. But there's, I think, got to be a direct price to Benn here for this experience. I'm going to say the price here is that Percival does hear something going on, and he makes his way down from his apartment. He approaches the cellar as Benn is finishing up cracking open the last few kegs. At this point, there's beer all over the floor in this cellar, and Benn is kind of sloshing around in it as he's trying to make his way out. And I think Percival comes down and he sees a figure emerging out of the cellar, and he grabs that big paddle that he was using to stir the mash, and he's holding it up and he says, "Who goes there?" And I think Benn just freezes. He's got his hood up. He's accustomed to this. He doesn't look like he did earlier when they talked. It's dark in this room, and Percival is maybe like holding a lamp and then this paddle in one hand, and so the shadows are casting about. And I think Benn is going to look at Percival and say, in a very soft voice, he's going to say, "Walk away, brewer. Walk away, and I won't be forced to hurt you." And I think he's going to try and intimidate Percival to walk away. And this is going to be plus fierce. 6 on the dice, +2 is an 8. So on a 10+, your target believes your threat. On a 7 to 9, you are unconvincing or they are not persuaded. Your target will choose one. Freeze in fear, surprise, or confusion. Try to strike a bargain with you or talk their way out of it. Start looking for a way out and take it if they can. Put something or someone between themselves and you. Laugh at you, challenge you, or attack you right then and right there. So I think that Percival, let's ask the fate chart, because I think this is a fate chart question. Because I think it's either Percival's going to freeze in fear or he's going to attack. So does Percival love his beer so much that he's going to attack an intruder that just threatened his livelihood and his safety? I think it is probably 50-50. It's a chaos rank of 6, 50-50. Here we go. 72 is a yes. So I think Percival looks at him, and Benn is not really an imposing figure. He's a little bit more slight and definitely shorter than Percival is. And Percival is this brewer with these big arms, and he's bulky around his midsection. And Percival raises the paddle and says, "You made a mistake coming into my brewery and mucking about. I'm going to make you pay for this." And starts stalking forward. Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures, and thanks so much to Syrinscape for the lovely ambient sounds and music throughout the episode. If you enjoyed the show, please tell anyone and everyone in your life about it. And if you haven't already, please rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app. It really does help others find me. If you want to interact with me, my handle on Instagram and Twitter is @ErrantSoloPod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. I also post short fiction and campaign-related materials on my website, errantadventurespod.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.